Hey there, innovation champions. Melissa Dinwiddie here. I want to tell you a story about way back in high school when I was first chair viola, not violin, but viola in my high school chamber orchestra. It was a very small orchestra. There were two violinists, two violists, and a cello. And the two violinists practiced constantly. They practiced before school, after school, weekends. Me, I practice, but it was more kind of like the bare minimum. I liked classical music, but I can't say that it was my passion. And my effort reflected that. Not surprisingly, the violinists were significantly more skilled than I was. Now, here's the part that I got completely wrong. I didn't credit their ability to the hundreds of hours that they had invested. Instead, I looked at the gap between their playing and my playing, and I reached a very different conclusion. My conclusion was that they had something that I didn't. They had some innate musical capacity that I simply had been born without. So, I put down my viola and I stopped making music. And I told myself this story for at least a decade and a half. I'm not a real musician. The true story, I just didn't practice. That's it. That's the whole gap. Now, I see this exact mistake, this mistaken math in analytical teams all the time. Someone in a brainstorm offers an idea that, lands kind of awkwardly, or they sit through a creative exercise feeling kind of stiff and kind of uncertain, while other people seem really comfortable. And they reach the same conclusion that I reached at 15. I don't have it. Now, what they're actually seeing isn't a talent differential, it's a permission differential. The people who look really comfortable at generating messy, half-formed ideas have just had more practice doing it in environments where it was safe to do it badly. They accumulated permission over time. That's not a personality type. That's a reps problem. And here's what makes it expensive for your organization. When analytical people quietly decide that the creativity conversation isn't theirs to have, they stop contributing the thing that they're actually best at. Pattern recognition, systematic thinking, the instinct to ask, hey, what if this assumption is wrong? The ability to connect dots across domains that no one else thought to connect. That's not the absence of creative thinking. That's creative thinking running on a different operating system. So that story that I'm not creative, that's really the only thing standing between your engineers and your next breakthrough. Now, there are two versions of this story, and both of them are costing you. First, there's the external myth. Creativity is for the creative people. Now, this is the version that shows up in org charts when the innovation team gets built and somehow the engineers end up in implementation rather than ideation. Nobody said that they weren't creative out loud. They just weren't invited. The signal wasn't received. Then there's the internal myth. I'm not one of them. And this is the version that lives inside the people themselves. It's the engineer who sits in a brainstorm and notices that discomfort of not knowing the right answer. And because of that, goes silent. They're not withholding. They've just decided long time ago that this particular conversation belongs to someone else. And what happens is that both myths compound. The external one reinforces the internal one, and the internal one makes the external one invisible to fix. Now there's good news. The good news is that both are stories, and stories can change. Now, I learned something at music camp a long time ago. In my 30s, I picked up a guitar. Now, I had zero ambition. Well, actually, it wasn't completely zero. I wanted to just back myself singing in my living room. I didn't have any aspirations to perform at that point. I just wanted to sing in my living room, and I wanted to play guitar to just, back myself. However, less than a year into guitar lessons, I went to a music camp for a week. And at that music camp, I had a revelation that just cracked something wide open for me. Music wasn't something that only real musicians, professional musicians, got to have. I got to have it in my own way, at my own level, for my own reasons. And I got to determine what that looked like. And the story that I'd been telling myself for over 15 years, the one that started when I measured my, I wouldn't say completely unpracticed, but not as practiced as my orchestra mates playing. When I measured my playing against two violinists who poured their lives into their instruments, turned out to be wrong. And within 4 years, I was performing as a jazz singer around the Bay Area. Not because I suddenly had some, magical talent that these violinists had back in high school, but because I stopped living by a story that wasn't true. And let's be honest, I poured myself into learning how to sing jazz at that point. Now, your analytical team members are living inside stories like this right now. The question isn't how to find the creative ones. The question is, what would it take for them to change the story? Now, I ran a micro experiment recently with a small group of strangers, really, for the Club of Silicon Valley. This is a women's leadership networking group. And one of the women in the group was dealing with a very real, very stressful challenge. Her son was cutting school. So we used that as the challenge when we ran an experiment from my book, Innovation at Work, also behind me right here. Experiment number 6, which is called Yes and That's Terrible. Here's how it works. You start with a real challenge, and then someone in the group, it works well with a small group of people. Someone opens with a deliberately absurd solution. I put that in finger quotes because you want it to be terrible. The worse, the better. That is the whole point. And each person in your circle responds with yes and, building on the absurdity, on the terribleness, instead of correcting it. You don't want to save it. You don't want to make it better. You want to build on it. And every additional idea has to be terrible. So for the first several minutes, the goal is to keep the terrible idea growing. So somebody started with pay him for skipping school. Like, nobody would ever really do that, right? Yes, and pay him to go to the beach. Yes, and buy a ticket to send him to Hawaii. Yes, and send me to join him on a trip to Hawaii. So, as you can imagine, the room was laughing and getting crazier and wilder. And then something really interesting happened. As the ideas kept building, what kind of bubbled up underneath the silliness were real insights about how to genuinely support a kid who might be overwhelmed by school, about what kids actually need to thrive, about the difference between managing behavior and understanding what's driving it. And the woman who offered the challenge said that something really shifted for her during the exercise. The anxiety that she had walked in with had loosened. And that is what this exercise does. It removes the social risk of looking foolish, which removes that internal censor, which lets the useful stuff come up. So how do you run it with your team? We'll start with a real challenge that your team is currently stuck on and open with the most ridiculous possible solution. And I highly recommend modeling the absurdity yourself if you are leading this experiment. And then go around the room and everyone adds yes and building on whatever came before. Run this for 4 to 6 minutes. In the book, I suggest 8. That might get a little long, so don't feel like you have to go for 8 minutes. But if the energy is there, then go for 8 minutes. Go to a natural stopping place and make sure to keep it terrible on purpose. Then debrief for 4 minutes or 5 minutes. What unexpected directions emerged? What did you notice? The whole thing, you should be able to run it in 12 minutes. Might even take less. Any size team can work, but you want to keep the groups to, it works well in groups of 4 to 6 as people are going around with their yes ands. No materials are required for this, and it is fully remote compatible. You can send people off into breakout rooms. The full experiment with facilitation script, remote adaptation, and scale guidelines is experiment number 6 in Innovation at Work, page 75. So have fun with that. And let me know how it goes. Now, last year, I worked with 125 project and program managers at the PMI, Project Management Institute, San Francisco Bay Area Professional Development Day. People whose professional lives revolve around Gantt charts and risk registers and very structured process. And chatting with me in the lunch line, one of them said, almost apologetically, I don't really think of myself as creative. But by the end of our session, something had shifted for him. He didn't, suddenly believe he was a creative person, but he had started to question whether that framing had ever been accurate or useful. And one of the attendees commented on a LinkedIn post about the session afterwards that it was electric. She wrote that in all caps, which is kind of cool. Somebody else wrote that I had shared real tools and models, not just buzzwords, that participants could apply immediately. And the reason that I share this is because I want you to know that the creativity was never missing. The permission was. That's it. So if you lead analytical or technical teams and you're trying to build a genuine innovation culture, here's the practical version. Stop waiting for your engineers to become more creative. They already think creatively. They've just been told through structure and through exclusion and through the story in their own heads that the creativity conversation belongs to someone else. Then make terrible the goal explicitly and out loud. I know that it's so counterintuitive, but the experiment that I shared works because it removes the social risk of being wrong. Now, that's not a hack, it's the mechanism. Build more of it into your team's regular rhythms. And start with one experiment, not a culture change initiative, not even a workshop, but 12 minutes at the top of your next team meeting. The story changes when the evidence changes. So give your team new evidence. So here's what I want to leave you with. The next time you're in a brainstorm or an innovation session, look around the room and notice who isn't talking. I would bet that there's someone on your team right now who reached a conclusion at some point, maybe in school, maybe in a previous job, somewhere, that the creative conversation wasn't theirs to have. And they have been living by that story ever since. That story isn't true. But it's not going to change on its own. It changes when the evidence changes. When someone is given explicit permission to make something terrible and discovers that the terrible thing leads somewhere interesting. And that is what Innovation at Work is built to do. It is 52 micro experiments, each one designed to give your team new evidence about what they're capable of. If you want to start with experiment number 6, yes, and that's terrible, you now have everything you need in order to run it. Just 12 minutes, any team, no materials. And if you want the full toolkit, grab the book, innovationatworkbook.com, or use that QR code, and the link is also in the description. If this was useful, hit like, subscribe, and ring that bell. I post practical tools for innovation leaders every week. Until then, stay curious, stay playful, and keep creating the impossible. Ciao.